right, we have another question from Achilleas. Basically, he's basically saying, what were the weapons that the ancient Greeks used the most? He also asked, he read that they didn't train, particularly the Athenians, they didn't train with weapons all that much, and if there was any difference in training between the Spartans and the Athenians and all the other city states. He wondered what the metaphysics of weapons were, which is, I guess Evolian. You can get into that, and also he says pretty much that they train the opposite of the way we train today. Like they use like different muscles than like let's say weightlifters use. But he's basically like I always figure with Indians, right? Indians didn't do weapon sparring. How are they such bad at? I guess they've learned by just smashing other Indians in the head. But like in terms of like I said, just summing it up, what weapons did they use? Did they train with the weapons or not? How did they train? What was the difference in training? Was there any metaphysics to the training, like philosophy to the training? And did they train differently than the way people train now? I guess in terms of, weapons training, like fencing with masks or stick sparring with the helmets or whatever. Anyway, what do you think?
The Indians did do weapon sparring. Some of the tribes did.
Okay.
And it's where the coup stick comes from, which is a backward curved, almost like a cane that doesn't have a real hard. It's almost like hitting a guy with a bow stave.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So they did spar the Indians.
Yeah. So you would have that. The different periods in ancient Greece, the classical city-state period, the Spartans. A guy named Paul Cartledge is like the dean of like Spartan history, and it's apparent that except for the sacred band in Thebes, that the Spartans were the only guys out there. This shows through in Pressfield's book, Gates of Fire. The Spartans were the only professional foot soldiers out there that were training together with weapons consistently. And that was their thing. They were the professional soldiers. But there was weapon training going on in the Palestra. So you had the javelin throw. And the youth would have provided the local pelt tests for throwing.
Right.
The lower class youths would have been throwing rocks and fighting with clubs. I think he was called a pistoli or something. This type of guy, this ghetto Greek city-state, slave that was out there with a club and rocks and hopefully a knife to cut some rich guy's throat. The youths, like the Romans did with their velites, that they would have the young men out front throwing. The Greeks would have them on the flanks throwing their stuff and using their pelt shield to deflect. And they would throw the type of javelin throwing that was practiced by duelists in a palestra was underhanded. There's an illustration of this in All Power Fighting. The athletic overhand throwing was for throwing over the heads of the front line in an arc that come down over the shield and get somebody that's standing in the back. And that's something that the young men would be doing behind or on the flanks, and that with the Spartans, their helots, their slave soldiers, they were peltas. They would be behind them throwing their javelins, and then when they were done throwing their javelins, they would take their shields and they'd help push the back of the Spartan similars forward. Now, the places like Athens, Corinth, and many of these other city-states, they had a master, they had a ball coach, a Sphiristos, I think, a guy that, he was a handball coach, but it was for your coordination. There was a hoplomachus who taught you how to use your aspis, your dory, which is the spear. Even though it was a hoplomachus, that's based on the hoplon, which was the old obsolete shield that wasn't used anymore. It was more like a Roman shield. They now advanced to the aspis. This is the most important weapon. It rests on the shield. It's like a big dish. And his dory is 7 to 11 feet tall. And they practiced moving for doling so that they wouldn't get stabbed in the leg, and for switching the grip to an overhand thrust to an underhand thrust for dueling, and also for fighting in formation, because there were different times when it was desired to thrust over or under. So that person existed. It would be like if you imagine a Victorian era British, boxing club that maybe had one guy there that taught the sword and the dueling pistol. So it would be a specialty that most of the people wouldn't be that good with. They would barely be familiar with it. In other words, none of the guys in the Athenian army would probably be able to take out the Hoplomachus at the Palaestra.
Right.
Okay. So metaphysically, the weapon, I'd like to point out that Milo Curton did dress up like Achilles when they crushed the Sybarites in a war in southern Italy with the big club and everything. There were two things that the ancient Hellenes were terrified of. Philosophically, it was zero and infinity, assigning a value to infinity.
Oh, yeah, it said that.
Okay, they worked around. They knew about zero, but they worked around it. They were terrified about assigning a value to infinity. On the civic level, there was a superstition about a person that's been stained with fellow blood. That men had to go through some sort of decompression ritual before they got home to the city-state after the battle, and I'm not real familiar with what forms these took.
The Indians did that.
Most traditional people do it. Tribal people tend to do that, and the ancient Greeks were tribal people.
Yeah, so they try to decompress the guy.
And as far as the strength goes, the most important thing, strength-wise, to the ancient Greeks was hip and leg, because it was the big push when they were all together in a phalanx fighting. You got a bunch of skinny legs going against a bunch of stout fellows.
Yeah.
They're going to get bowled over.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Pretty good. Pretty good job. All right.